Hello and welcome to the Employment Law Pod from Boyce Turner. My name's Andy Whittaker. I'm a partner here in the employment team at Boyce Turner. And as ever with the pod, we like to talk about things that are interesting, new developments in employment law, new case law, or things that we just think you would like to hear about. And on today's pod, I'm joined by a special guest, Will Morris from Perfectus Recruitment. Hi, Will.
Hi, Andy. How you doing?
Yeah, very well, thanks. Very well. And the reason that Will is here is that we recently held an event together at our offices in Reading to talk about the Employment Rights Act, specifically some changes around unfair dismissal rights. And this is of particular interest to employment lawyers, obviously, but similarly, it's of a particular interest as well to recruiters, Will.
Yeah, absolutely. I think certainly within the sector we operate in, which is the supply of tech candidates to the sector, primarily across the UK, the employment regulation changes are key, knowing and understanding that and being able to advise your clients as well. I found it really informative last week from your talk.
Yes, and similarly, I enjoyed some of the advice that you provided as well. And I think the aim of this podcast today is to go through some of the issues that we discussed and to summarise some of the takeaways that we landed upon as we got to the end of the session. So, no further ado, I'll sort of introduce, I guess, the reason that we raised this as an issue and why we decided to talk about it. And as I said, it is related to the Employment Rights Act, which is the biggest change to employment law in the UK in 20 years. And there are enormous amounts of changes that are being introduced via the Act, some of which have been introduced already. Some more are going to be introduced during the course of this year, so 2026. More that will come in 2027. But then there's also a raft of other employment-related legislation that the government is looking to propose during the course of this Parliament. So it's a period of significant change in employment law. And we could talk for a very long time about some of the changes around trade union rights. We could talk about some of the changes around family leave, changes to flexible working, which are being introduced over the next year or so. And indeed, we have spoken about them at length on the podcast before. Mm-hmm. But the particular issue that we wanted to raise was around the changes to unfair dismissal laws that are going to be introduced from January of next year. And this has been one of the headline pieces from the ERA and one of the issues that's been most well publicised. In the UK, in order to bring a claim for unfair dismissal, ordinarily, an employee needs to have 2 years of continuous service to bring that claim. That's not universally the case because there may be circumstances where an individual is dismissed because, let's say, they're pregnant or they're involved in union activities, and a dismissal for those reasons doesn't require a qualifying period. But for most terminations, to be protected from unfair dismissal, you need to have 2 years of qualifying service. Now, that has changed and waxed and waned over the years. There was a chart that I used to rely upon when I did a university lecture a few years ago that showed the qualifying period going up and down over time. And across the chart, I'd coloured it red, blue, red, blue, red, blue, red, and then a little bit of yellow and blue, and then red again. And it just reflects the change of government. And pretty much every time there's a change of government, there's changes to the length of service.
That's what I was going to ask you. You said it's the biggest change for, was it 10 years or 20 years?
Yeah, absolutely. But it has, as far as the qualifying period is concerned, it's moved from 2 to 1 year and then back from 1 to 2 years. But the government's proposal, or at least when it was in opposition, it was suggesting that it was going to introduce protection from day one. So there being essentially no qualifying period whatsoever to bring an unfair dismissal claim. Now, as the proposal moved from a green paper to a manifesto promise to the King's Speech into parliamentary legislation and finally the passed act, it did change. Initially, we thought we were looking at the introduction of something known as an initial period of employment, so an initial 9-month period where an individual would still have protections, but they'd be slightly watered down from the normal unfair dismissal rights. But where we ended up, finally, when the bill was passed last year and became the Employment Rights Act, was a 6-month qualifying period. So it's not become a day one right. We haven't got this initial period of employment, but we do have this 6-month period after which an individual then acquires the full rights. And one of the issues that sits alongside that, which wasn't necessarily proposed to begin with and almost slipped in via the back door, is the removal of the cap on compensation for unfair dismissal. So that has traditionally sat at either a year's salary or a sum that's gone up with inflation every year and currently sits at around 120,000. But that's had numerous impacts. So, for example, it means that very high earners, as a result, won't often look to employment tribunal claims for unfair dismissal because they simply can't be compensated for their full losses. And also, we do, from a practice perspective, quite often see individuals without the qualifying service looking to bring claims for discrimination or whistleblowing or other rights where you don't need a qualifying period of service, so they can get a claim in via the back door, if you see what I mean, and they can also potentially recover uncapped compensation. So the combination of those two changes, and this is to be implemented from the 1st of January next year, means that there's going to be an enormous amount of pressure on businesses to make decisions about recruitment within those first 6 months of employment, really definitive decisions about those employees. And also a recognition that if we get that wrong, it then becomes potentially a much more costly issue to try and resolve and deal with.
Do you think, and this question's born out of conversations I've had with HR managers who have different interpretations, do you think the probationary periods as standard within contracts will change?
So there's two different things here. There's contractual probationary periods, and then there's the statutory, if you like, probationary period of 6 months. So after those 6 months, we know the individual is going to require those protections from unfair dismissal. Your contractual probationary period doesn't need to match it because it's a different thing.
Because it's statutory.
Yeah. Okay. So a contractual probationary period invariably deals with things like enhanced notice provisions. So in your probationary period, you have 1 week's notice, for example, but then once you've got through your probation, that might be extended up to a month, 3 months, 6 months, whatever is agreed between the parties in the contract. So those two things can continue to operate separately. They don't have to match up. But I think what businesses are going to have to really think about is what do they want to do as far as their probationary periods are concerned. Because if, for example, you're going to run a 6-month probationary period and not make any definitive decisions until you get to that 6 months date, what happens if there's a bit of slippage or you're uncertain or someone is ill or something like that? If you're not planning to make a definitive decision until you get to that 6 months time period, you can all of a sudden, by accident, find yourself getting over and above the 6-month period, and then the individual acquiring all of those protections before you've actually made a definitive decision about whether you want to keep that person.
What we're seeing is what's often forgotten, and I think without getting political, what's often forgotten in the current government is a lot of organisations, a lot of businesses in the UK that aren't huge businesses that prop up the economy. So we work with lots of tech businesses. Yes, we work with some household names, but we work with organisations that may be 5, 10, 20, 25 members of staff who don't have a proper experienced HR function within the organisation. Often HR is just tagged on to someone's responsibility, also as the office manager, and sometimes even the receptionist as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
What would be your advice to those sort of organisations to position themselves in the best way so that they, I guess, ultimately don't have claims made against them, and haven't really got the need or possibly the finances to hire an experienced HR person who really understands a landscape that, from what you're telling me, is changing continually as well?
Yeah, well, awareness is obviously going to be really important. One of the reasons that we do the podcasts that we do and the events that we do is to try and spread the word and raise awareness so people know that these changes are coming and so they can prepare themselves for it. Fundamentally, I think when any individual starts a new job, and you'll know this better than I do, and you might want to add to this as well, you want to know that you found a new home, you found somewhere where you connect with the people that you work with, that they're going to support you in respect of your day-to-day work, but also support you in terms of your career progression and additional training and support you in your career, I suppose. So every employer should be doing that, frankly, regardless of the existence or otherwise of an experienced HR manager. If you've got someone who's joining you, you want them to stay, you want them to feel happy and content and engaged and enthused. So it's the job of every manager who recruits someone in those initial months to do that and to engage properly with their employees, to make sure that you build that rapport, there's clarity about what you are expecting that individual to do, Similarly, there's clarity from the individual about what they're expected to do. And that's just good business sense, because you want them to be a really useful contributor to your business. And that doesn't happen if you don't engage with them.
I couldn't agree more. I think you picked up on some of the points I was obviously speaking about last week when we were speaking. I think I gave the stat, roughly 25% of new hires leave within 6 months in the UK. They're validated figures. Don't ask me the source, I can't remember, but I did check those out.
Yeah,
which is a huge number and a huge financial impact on those organisations, and quite a logistical issue as well with people coming and going, and aligning that to the latest employment regulations. So you're absolutely right. Having a robust, fair and honest sort of recruitment process, having a benefits package that is really in line with what employees look for these days. We've lost out on placements over the years where the benefits package at offer stage has been presented to a candidate and it's not aligned to either what they're used to or what the competition is offering. And as I said, with that number of people, leaving within that first 6 months, getting the onboarding side of it is absolutely right. People people get excited for their first day, and if the basics are wrong, like we talked about,
the laptop's not set up,
and they spent the day with IT getting access to systems and things like this. It's all of that's interlinked. So I'm always available to speak to our clients and advise them. Ultimately our job titles are recruitment consultants, so we always hang our hat on that word consultant. It's trying to give consultancy advice and not just filling jobs. It's actually giving advice to clients, so whether that's in the form of benchmarking salaries, giving them advice on what's happening with benefits. We've had a few clients actually reach out about the employment regulation changes. Obviously, we invited them to the talk last week to hear your pearls of wisdom from it. So it's all interlinked and very aligned to get it right. And I think it's even more important than ever, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so. It's a phrase I stumbled across a few months ago as well. I don't know if it's in your lexicon too, but the idea of corporate catfishing.
Right.
So businesses who will sell themselves, they'll project a particular image of who they are, what they're like, what their culture is like, how they look after their people, the benefits they provide, the access or otherwise the benefit to bonuses, commissions, that sort of thing, to get people through the door. And then people turn up and they realize this is not what was sold to me.
It's the biggest example of that is the whole work from home, and I'm sure we don't want to be talking about the work from home debate because we could talk about that for the next hour. But it's certainly interesting, and looking at it from a recruitment agency, I think it's very rare that we get positions now that are fully remote. Pretty much everything is hybrid. And I think it was in the news this week, John Lewis are looking to bring hybrid staff back into the office pretty much full time. I'm not sure exactly how it works with John Lewis, with them all being partners, aren't they? It's a slightly different setup, but it's funny how things are portrayed. And after the lockdowns, there was a bit of a boom in regards to recruitment and businesses as a whole, and a real desire to sort of get going. And a lot of businesses were quite happy to shout about how fantastically well they were doing, even with their staff working remotely now. Those same organisations aren't shouting about the fact they're actually asking those employees to come back to the office. So it's funny how things sort of pan out. But yeah, we've certainly seen a shift with all of that as well. And it's a harder economic times at the moment, isn't it? So
yeah, absolutely. And I think that goes back to what we were saying around making the best of those initial months and running an effective onboarding process. This isn't just a legal compliance point. And I say this a lot when I provide training for managers, because I appreciate that there's a lot of law out there. There's a lot of employment law out there. And there's lots of ways that you can get tripped up and make mistakes. And I get that. And talking about the sort of the businesses that you were mentioning, the smaller businesses, 20 to 50 employees maybe, with perhaps without a dedicated HR resource, I get that compliance can be tricky. But if you just look at the bottom line, when someone engages with you to bring someone in, there's fees that are associated with the service that you provide. There's a loss of productivity in the period before you manage to place that individual into the role while they're still running shorthanded. There's then going to be a reduction in productivity when the person joins, while they get up to speed and while they learn their role. And then, of course, if that placement fails and you have to start the whole thing again, all of this is just impacting upon your bottom line. And this is before we even think about legal compliance. This is businesses just losing money and not being as productive and effective as they could be. So the reason to do this, the reason to engage with the people that you hire early on and to get those onboarding processes right, make sure their laptop works, all of the little things, the easy wins, making sure you get that right is not just about legal compliance. It's about running your business effectively.
Yeah, we're seeing with organisations over the last few years within tech that they have in their mind what they're looking to hire for, and it'll be very specific. It might be a modern workplace engineer with experience with Copilot, Azure, 365, etc. Real specific. They want people who have rolled that out maybe or implemented that within a business, and they won't shift their mindset from that sort of perfect candidate. And I try to advise organisations sometimes, if you can't find that perfect candidate, what impact actually does it have to your business of not having someone in situ? Because if you have someone who's, 70, 80% there in regards to the background and the skill set, who's keen to pick up the additional skills, they can probably be of benefit to the organisation quite quickly. But it doesn't change the fact that most clients still have very much in mind what they're looking for. So bring it back to what you were talking about. If someone doesn't work out and leaves after 3 or 4 months or even 6 months, it actually means the project deliverables can be the impact of that to the business and to the finances of not meeting those deadlines and those deliverables can actually be really significant. So like all the bits we talked about, the onboarding, etc., getting that absolutely right and hoping that individual sort of sticks around. There's always variables that you can't control. People's personal circumstances may change and they need to leave the organisation. But there's also, I think there's less loyalty as well. If you look at the average tenure of employees within the tech sector, this is backed up with nothing other than me looking at CVs for the last 25 years. So I can't support this view, but having looked at a lot of profiles, it was very rare for employees to not stick around at an organisation for a little while. So typically you'd see someone spend 4 years somewhere, 5 years somewhere, maybe just 2 years in the next one, 6 in the next, that sort of vibe. Yeah. I would say the majority of CVs we're seeing these days, candidates average tenure is probably closer to about 18 months.
Yeah.
So if you're looking, since 2020 over that sort of 6-year period, it's not unusual to look at a CV and that individual's done 4, 5, 6 different roles. Now, some of that will be down to the role being misrepresented or the role not working out quite how they would like. But it could also be about the areas we talked about, positioning yourself in the right way with your benefits and your onboarding and treating staff well. So people don't hang around as much in organisations. That you don't get many lifers within organisations unless you work for Boys Turner, actually.
Well, we have some staff loyalty, which is a good thing. Yeah. But it's true. Yeah, you're right. I mean, we experience it as well. People come in, they can, they acquire particular skills and experience, and then they want to move on. That's the nature of life, isn't it? I think it's not just unique to our business or the sectors that you operate in. I think it's just generally people are.
But I think organisations should focus on employees more, because people do move on for either, it's one of a couple of reasons. It's either progression or skill progression, a change in circumstance like we talked about you can't control, or finances, or a combination of. So if someone's offering what they perceive as a better opportunity and more money, they're going to move on. What employers can do about that is actually make sure they are regularly benchmarking their existing team. We do this for a couple of organisations. I did it for the same organisation every year for about 15 years until they got acquired last year. We benchmarked the whole of their tech team. I think it was about 22 individuals, so that they ensured that they were being paid the right amount and they were looking after those individuals. And they had a great longevity of staff there at that organisation. Not so much now, they've been acquired, unfortunately, but they really managed to keep hold of those staff and they continually put them through training and advance their skills. And that's what a good employer looks like.
Yeah.
It's sometimes lost, and it's just, I think it's just the way it is within really big organisations. A really big organisation can look fantastic from the outside, but I won't name them, but there's a very well-known fintech organisation who got a fantastic perception as advancing, I'm trying to pick my words carefully not to give them away, advancing
in their particular sector of operation.
In their particular sector from the outside in. But within the organisation, those I've spoken to who work there, it's absolutely chaos, and their turnover of staff is huge. And it does often seem aligned with the bigger companies. Once you lose that, it's very hard to bring that back.
Okay, so we've spoken a little bit about what we can do once the people have joined and the importance of making sure we get that onboarding right. We've also spoken about how sometimes we need to be a bit more pragmatic about how we recruit in, and always holding out for that perfect candidate can sometimes be problematic if we then end up not being able to fulfill roles or fulfill projects because we just don't have the hands available. But I suppose to finish off, what would your top tips be in terms of making sure that you're identifying the best talent and that you're helping you, I suppose, do your job to get the right people coming to interview and then making sure that you're able to secure those people once you've engaged with them?
I could talk for a couple of hours about it, but if I was just going to give a snapshot, I think it's get all your ducks in a row. So iron out a recruitment process, iron out a benefits package, make sure that you've got an onboarding process, getting that bit right. That anyone can do that.
Yeah.
So beyond that, my biggest tip would be brief your recruiter. So whether that's an external recruiter like someone at my company, Perfectus, or whether it's an internal recruiter, the same applies. Brief that recruiter with real detail. And what I mean by that is not just a running through the skill set. Talk to them about the opportunity within the organization for this hire. Talk about where they'll fit into the team. Make sure during the process they're going to be meeting the people. What does that process look like, and stick to it. A lot of clients don't stick to the process. It frustrates candidates with extra stages. And make, as I said, brief the recruiter, but make the process purposeful. We talked about that last week. There's too many companies doing 6, 7, 8 stage interview processes.
Yeah.
No one needs to do that. So yeah, I think my main point would just be brief that recruiter so that they're fully prepared. It saves everyone's time. Candidates aren't being contacted about a role they're unsuitable for. Candidates aren't being interviewed for a role they're unsuitable for. Clients aren't wasting their time interviewing candidates who are unsuitable. So get a plan, stick to it, figure out exactly what you're looking for, and brief the recruiter accordingly.
Well, with all the changes that are being introduced over the next year or so, following those sort of steps, I think is going to give businesses the best possible chances of, first of all, finding the right people, getting them in, running a process that engages them and enthuses them to come in and accept the offers that might be made, and then hopefully make those offers or those placements stick as well once they join the business.
Yeah, you make it interesting, but you use the term right candidate, and I often pick up my consultants on the phrase when they talk about, it's the perfect candidate, because they base it purely on skills. There's so much more than the skills that are relevant to a role. It's their situation, their location, their financial expectations that make them the right candidate. So I was going to ask you, like, in the sense of, you talked about the changes to employment regulations are so frequent. How do you actually keep on top of them? Do you log into the HMRC each day, or like, how does it, or the government website, how does it actually?
Yeah, well, I mean, fortunately, as lawyers, we subscribe to lots of different news sources. We have our own internal systems that we operate. We subscribe to some knowledge management systems as well, and updates are provided through there. So it does enable us to sort of keep an eye on things. And certainly the journey of the Employment Rights Act has had many meanders and twists and turns as it's gone through Parliament. And then even now, the government has been publishing to the early part of this year numerous changes to its timeline. So about implementation and the commencement of consultation exercises, opportunities for businesses to get involved, draft legislation being produced following the conclusion of those consultation exercises. So there is a lot of information coming out. And I recognize that businesses out there don't necessarily have all the resources that we have available to be able to tap into that. There are places that you can go. Certainly the government websites do publish all their consultations. They do publish their timelines. There is information out there. Obviously, we produce stuff ourselves. So we have our newsletters that we produce, run this podcast, obviously put webinars together. So we do the best that we can as well to disseminate the information that we get. Again, I go back to a point that we made earlier on in the talk. It is hugely difficult, especially without a dedicated HR resource, to stay on top of absolutely every change that might be implemented from time to time. But if you pick up an old Butterworth's employment law guide with a very thin toilet paper type pages that's about, 6 inches thick, there's a lot of employment law in there, and I recognize that. But the word reasonable comes up again and again and again on all those different pages. And if employers can engage with their employees reasonably, That's not a perfect shield.
That word, I've heard that used right across legal situations. It's all about being fair and reasonable, isn't it?
It's exactly that. So, we do our best to try and keep all of our clients and our contacts updated with all the legal changes that come into force. But businesses should always focus on, are we conducting this process reasonably? If we were on the receiving end, or if we were the individual who's being subjected to this process, would we consider it to be reasonable? And if the answer to that is yes, you're more likely making fair and justifiable decisions than you would otherwise be the case.
You must have days where you've planned your whole day out and you walk in and there's some changes and you suddenly go into reading mode. You go and find a corner to sit in and read it all.
Absolutely. It's not quite as bad as it was in the days of COVID. And again, I appreciate this wasn't the biggest challenge that was going on at the time. But the government was clearly, acting on its, not quite making things up as it goes along. That's not fair. But there was so much it was having to react to very quickly. Thinking on their feet. And especially all the rules around furlough and that sort of thing. They were changing that almost on a 24-hour, 48-hour basis. They were then providing that information and publishing it. We were then having to digest it overnight, work out what it means, because come 9 o'clock in the morning, our clients were ringing us and saying, what does this mean? And us having to explain it. So we're not in a situation where there's such rapid change at the moment, but the ERA does represent a huge change. There's lots of moving parts. Consultation is amending some of the changes. So there's a lot to try to keep tabs on, and obviously on the Employment Law Pod and through our other various media, we'll endeavour to keep everyone updated as the changes come in.
Yeah, that'd be good. I'll be keeping an eye out for it all. So.
Great stuff. Well, that's one subscriber. Thanks, Will.
Brilliant.
Well, thanks very much for your time, Will, and thanks everyone for listening to this episode of the Employment Law Pod. If you're interested in checking out any more of our episodes, then they can be found on the Boyce Turner website, or alternatively, you can like and subscribe wherever you might listen to your podcasts. So once again, thanks for listening and goodbye.